Hello and welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Lauren and today I'm looking at a video called Katana versus Longsword, The Sad Truth. This is by YouTube channel Cerberusarms. And so with me, because I've got with me my longsword. This is my longsword. And I have with me my other sword. My two swords. I've got them both because we're having fun today with my katana and my longsword. So I'm curious to see which one is better according to this particular channel. I just want to know. I want to know which one is better. And I have them both with me here because why not? These are my swords. I also just wanted to brag about the fact that I have them. Anyway, let us begin. Let us find out who wins.
Versus Longsword, a tale as old as time. Both technological marvels of their age, these are some of the most iconic weapons ever made. But which sword is objectively better? Are neckbeards more cringe than weaves? Well, we're about to find out.
And which am I? I will say I have seen both cut through some pretty impressive, like, impressive thicknesses of well, things to cut through, really. I can do that too. There it is. Just trying to get it to stand up.
Today, we're going to answer the age-old question. Which is better, the katana or the longsword? Now, I see a lot of videos on this topic, so I figured as somebody who genuinely loves both swords, I could take a crack at it. To make things fair, I purchased the katana and longsword from the same manufacturer, Ronin, both priced around 350 bucks. Okay. Here I have a Ronin Dojo Pro number 14. It has a 30-inch blade made of 1060 through hardened steel. And to compare, I have a Ronin Medieval Longsword number 2 with a 36-inch blade made of 1075 spring steel. Most videos online I see of people comparing longswords to katanas seem to be from a European perspective, mostly of people sick and tired of all the praise katanas get. Movies and anime have made out the katana to be some sort of mystical weapon capable of slicing through anything, which is obviously ridiculous. But I can't help but notice a hint of resentment when it comes to these comparison videos. Not to mention the obvious bias Europeans have when comparing an ancestral sword from their own culture to another.
I will say, like, with mine, the katana is it's a lot lighter than the longsword is. Like, this thing isn't particularly heavy, this sword, but it's heavier. It's significantly heavier than the katana is. So that is one thing I will say. Also, you move them in different ways. I'm gonna have to, like, be very careful about this. You move them in different ways. So, like, there's a very different strategy, I guess, into going into each weapon. Like, you're not going to have the same moves necessarily in both. But I don't know. I know more about the longsword. It's been a longer since I've used the other one. This one I use fairly regularly, but I'm curious. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna stop pausing.
We'll give props to Scholargrim though. He made a video addressing his own biases against katanas, and I respect his ability to be introspective and honest about it. I put a link to it down in the description if you guys want to check out his perspective on the topic. Like Skull admits, many are just sick of hearing how overhyped katanas are, and a lot of them seem to take it personally. What these people don't seem to realize is that the katana had a massive impact on American pop culture. If you're a gun-toting, rootin', tootin', red-blooded American like me, chances are you fucking love katanas. You grew up on martial arts movies, and you're really into Highlander when it first came out. Seriously, if you grew up as a kid in America during the 90s, you were bombarded with the awesomeness of katanas. From TV to movies, not to mention, this is right around the same time that anime came to America in full force. To a young, impressionable kid, the cool factor of katanas was undeniable. Back then, there was just a level of mystique about katanas because we knew so little about them. It was a mysterious sword from a faraway land that looked like nothing we'd ever seen before. And growing up as an American, we didn't have a cultural sword of our own, so we clung to what we were constantly eye-blasted with in popular media. In contrast, European swords were rarely romanticized in American movies. Sure, there were plenty of movies about knights, but their swords were never a focus. They were generally just seen as a tool or weapon the protagonists used, with the exception of Lord of the Rings, which is why many Americans, including myself, became obsessed with medieval weaponry. Let's be honest, nobody actually thinks a katana can cut straight through another sword. Anyone who does is either 9 years old or sleeps with an anime body pillow every night. All right, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the pros and cons of these legendary swords. And to help me do this, my buddy Brandon, who practices HEMA, drove down to do some sparring with me to see how these swords stack up against each other. Keep in mind, neither of us are experts, and we're not trying to kill each other. I just figured a comparison video wouldn't be fair without actually physically pitting these swords against one another.
That's not the type of longsword fighting I do. That's a more, I think that's a German style. I do more of an Italian
Right off
style.
the bat, you can tell the longsword has a significant range advantage, allowing the longsword user to pressure me with thrusts while at a relatively safe range. If the longsword fighter is skilled enough, they could potentially stay out of kill range of the katana, all while still being able to strike at their opponent. Also, since the blade is double-edged, the longsword allows for rapid follow-up attacks with the back of the blade, making it more unpredictable than the katana's single edge. And when it comes to defense, the longsword's imposing crossguard provides much more reliable protection than the katana's.
It is very helpful.
And in a pinch, the crossguard can also be used as a bludgeoning weapon if your opponent gets too close. The longsword's biggest advantage, in my opinion, is that practically every strike doubles as a block, which greatly increases your survivability in a duel. The longsword is extremely versatile. It really can do it all. But with that said, the length of the sword generally makes it slower and less viable in close-range combat than the katana. Sure, you can use the crossguard to bash your opponent, but with the shorter, more nimble katana, you can thrust and slash at full efficiency, even in close range.
That's fair.
Keep in mind there are
an
ass load of different types of longswords. Here's a chart of how many different types of longswords there are. God damn, that's a lot of variety. It's like the fucking Baskin-Robbins of swords. For this comparison, I chose what I consider to be the quintessential hand-and-a-half longsword. And if you disagree with me, I respect that. You probably have some pretty valid reasons for it. But you know what? This is my video. Go make your own damn video. Now, what the katana lacks in range, it more than makes up for in speed.
Yeah,
the shorter,
they're
lighter
faster.
blade allows for lightning-fast strikes, but means the katana user will need to close the distance, which can be extremely dangerous. Which brings me to my next point. In my opinion, the biggest difference between these two swords is not their blades, it's their fighting style. While the longsword relies on range and focuses on defensive cuts that double as blocks, the katana is a much more brutal weapon.
Yeah, basically what we learn in class tends to be everything that you do could be a parry depending on where their sword is, essentially. So it's either a parry, or it could be, you can turn it into a counterattack, or it can just end up being a cut. So it's like whatever you're doing, it kind of, whatever happens kind of depends on what their sword does, and then you have to turn it into something else, or like you might have to turn it into something else. But that's part of the fun of it, I think.
A warrior who lives by the code of Bushido does not fear death. Live by the sword, die by the sword. I cannot stress enough how dangerous an armed combatant is when they do not fear death, and the katana is a perfect encapsulation of that philosophy. End the fight in a single devastating strike, or die in battle with honor. To a samurai, nothing is more important. Similar to the Vikings, who are known as the most vicious, fearsome warriors in all of history. While the longsword is built for picking out weak points in your enemy's guard, the katana is balls to the wall victory or death. Now, we're not here to argue who's a better fighter, knights or samurai, because that's an impossible thing to test. I just thought it was important to mention because, again, no other comparison video I've seen has ever factored this in. All right, that's enough chit chat. Let's see what these swords.
That's fair though. I like that. It is different. Don't sit on that. Ew. Ew! Oh god. Oh, suddenly I feel the urge to insert a video of that that pressure thing crushing the pineapple. If you know, you spent too much time on the internet. This might be different too, because like that cutting board that they've got there, like if you do not have the appropriate like physical movement with the longsword, it's not gonna cut. I don't know if it will on the katana, if there's like more leeway in how you swing the sword in order to make it cut through that thing with the katana. I don't remember, but like you have to do something, you have to be pretty specific with the longsword in order, like, because you can't always just get through it through brute strength. So like it technically shouldn't need just a lot of strength, but you do have to be very, very specific in how you move everything for it to work efficiently and well without having to muscle through it. So I'm curious to see what they do.
Out these swords and see how well they cut. Looking at specs online is one thing, but actually wielding the sword and doing some real cutting is a whole different story. A lot of long swords, high-end wise, don't really come with scabbards, but this one does. It's not super nice or anything, but it is nice that it comes with one.
Yeah, I wish mine had one. I don't have a scabbard.
Sword belt. Generally, any long sword that comes with a scabbard is going to have a pretty shitty sword belt. But, you know, it's cool. It comes with one. That makes sense. Not bad for the price. Nice
Mine
blade.
is not sharp.
Blade. It's got a bit of distal tapering, which is actually pretty impressive. It's got a genuine leather handle, which is stitched nice and tightly. I will say the crossguard, the edges are pretty sharp. If I ran my hand really quickly across it, I could potentially cut myself. And same for the pommel. But, you know, you're paying $350 for a battle-ready sword. You can't really expect too much. But overall, pretty nice. The balance is a little weird on this sword. The balance is about here.
Oh.
Which you really want the balance to be at the last, 4 inches of the blade for a long sword. Not awful, not unusable, but definitely not a refined sword by any means. Balance is really important when it comes to swords because even a lightweight sword that is poorly balanced will feel strange and unwieldy in the hand. Even a heavy sword, if it's balanced properly, can be wielded really quickly. Oh, it's pretty good. It's marred a little bit. It's not super clean cut, but cut through it. Let's see how little effort I can put into it while still cutting it.
So he seems to be doing more of just a swinging with just a straight. He looks like he's almost chopping, like an axe or something.
Feel strange and unwieldy in the hand. Even a heavy sword, if it's balanced properly, can be wielded really quickly.
That is. He's putting a lot of on his arms there.
Marred a little bit. It's not super clean cut, but cut through it. Let's see how little effort I can put into it while still cutting it. The blade is so
He's got a really good angle on it.
It really travels through the target very nicely.
That's a pretty solid angle he's got on that.
It's pretty good. What I'm noticing about this longsword is that because this pommel is one of these rounded pommels,
I hate the
and
rounded
it's kind of
pommel.
got sharp edges, holding onto it like this and slicing, you feel that vibration in your hands and it kicks back into this hand.
I hate a rounded pommel. So this one I like. Also mine is significantly the handle on mine is significantly. Oops, there it goes. Is significantly larger than his. Like I have to go I can choke all the way down if I wanted to. But wink. He does have a good angle on it. I'm gonna try not to drop this one too, like I dropped the other one.
I wouldn't want to really do this for too long.
I just like a longer grip.
This is why they
honestly.
wear gloves. Longswords generally don't tend to be razor sharp because they're more for thrusting, and kind of want to be able to half-hand it and stuff like that. But
I don't know if I would fully agree with that. Like there's a lot of different like schools of thought when it comes to longswords, but thrusts are definitely important with a longsword, but a lot of what you do is cuts. There's a lot of cutting with a longsword. You want to do thrusts, but your goal ultimately is to kill the other person as quickly as possible, and a lot of the time that is a slice here. Like the rondel dagger is definitely for thrusting. And again, this might just be a difference of like what school you're looking at. If you're looking at more of an Italian, or if you're looking at German, or if you're looking at like a Spanish school, like some of that might change depending on who's your main instructor. But in the Italian school of fencing, it's rapiers are definitely a thrusting implement, but a longsword is definitely for slicing.
it's actually surprising how well it cuts for how sharp it is. This is not that sharp. It's not terrible at cutting. Not great. I'm sure in the footage you'll notice that when I swing the sword in slow motion, the blade has got some wobble to it since it is spring steel.
It is very
With
springy.
the blade moving like that, having your edge alignment perfect is going to be more difficult. That plus the fact that the handle's shorter.
But that's also why the angle of your slice is so important, and like how you're stepping forward, your timing. That's why all of those things are important with a longsword, because yeah, they wobble. They're very bendy, these things. Like they move. They're very bendy, and like again, part of that is to help with, weight, because you don't want them to be too long, but also because it just helps to have some give to them. That way it's harder to break them, for one thing. But yeah, so that is though like one of the reasons why drilling that angle so it's perfect, because it does matter. That matters hugely if you want to have an effective cut with a longsword.
Allow enough leverage, or as much leverage as a katana. It's not going to do great at slicing and slashing. So that's
Unless
fine,
you do it right.
Longswords are meant for thrusting, but it can get the job done, which is cool. I like the sword. The reaches can't be understated. Having that extra.
Because I will say, when I fight, I definitely do a lot more thrusting with the sword, but like finishing moves, oftentimes it's a slice. It often is. Like
5 inches of reach.
I'm not going to disagree with him every time.
All right, so now I got a double mat. This one has no rod in the center, so it's just 2 tatami mats. It's a big boy, and it's waterlogged, making it so much heavier. There we go. Man, even doing practice swings, this pommel really digs in your hand.
That sucks.
Okay, here we go. Whew.
It's pretty good.
Made it through. Nice. It's pretty clean cut. Not bad. It's funny because with the longsword cuts, you can see some waviness in the cut going through because the blade is made of spring steel, so it's kind of moving and warping a bit as it moves to the target. Nice. It's pretty good. Since the longsword is a thrusting weapon primarily, I'm gonna test it with the thrusts. It's kind of the beauty of the longsword though, because it's made of spring steel, you can thrust the sword and it can bend.
Yeah, it
And
can.
it'll just return back to shape. The reason why longswords are balanced toward the tip is because you want to be able to keep your sword tip constantly pointed at your target and be able to maneuver. But
You do always want to get it out in front of
to the
you.
target.
That's like the main.
The only real
the
downside I'll
sword in
say
front.
to this longsword, specifically this design, is the handle is a little short for my taste. It's hard to get leverage on it, and the pommel is extremely uncomfortable,
Yeah.
especially when you
I
swing and you have.
I really hate the circular pommel. I really, really do. I much prefer this like oval one. It's more comfortable. Like it fits in your grasp really nicely. And again, I like this longer pommel or the longer hilt handle because, I mean, when you have the gloves on, the gloves are kind of thick. They're huge. So like having extra padding there, it helps to have more space. But anyway.
Have to stop your cut. This thing just digs straight into your hand. Even with gloves, it's a little uncomfortable. The gloves definitely help, but wielding wise, it's not the best, but definitely gets the job done. Having that extra, 4 or 5 inches of range it's really nice.
That's fair.
Okay, so we're going to test the Ronin Katana.
Okay, 1 minute, because I gotta go and grab the one that I dropped. I've got it. It's back. I got it back. No worries. But it's been like, I haven't used this since college, so it's just, this has been window dressing for a long time for me. But we're talking about it, so since we're talking about it, which it should be in frame. I think that's fair. There it is.
Dojo Pro number 14. It's got a really nice, handsome red saya. Pretty cool sword. So we have a through hardened high carbon steel blade, which is why there's no homon, so it's not differentially hardened. I will say this sword is without a doubt the sharpest sword I own. I did not touch it. This is factory sharpness. This thing is scary sharp. It's kind of that sharpness.
Looks really
that
scary
your,
sharp.
that
looks scary.
I would not want to be on the receiving end of this edge. Since it is through hardened, I imagine it's going to be able to retain this edge really nicely. But very impressive, Ronin Katana. Really, really impressed.
It's really pretty.
The sword is fairly light, but it is strangely balanced. Like the balance point is almost mid.
That's weird.
Way on the blade. Katana, you kind of want it to be around here. And all the fittings on the handle are pretty low quality. I mean,
And that sucks considering you spent $350 on it. I have no idea what I spent on this. Because like I said, I was in college when I bought this sword. I have no idea what I spent on it, but it was probably like $50. This is also probably weirdly balanced. But that's not what we're talking about right now. We're not talking about that sword.
paying $350 for a sword. Feels a bit tip heavy. I wish there was a little more weight in the handle. It would be balanced better. If you just put a thicker Suba, like a full Suba that was made of iron, it would help tremendously. But this thing is gonna, this is gonna blast.
Yeah, that's gonna. Boing! Wow.
As you can see, it's perfectly smooth. It's just one flat plane, as opposed to when I cut with the longsword. It's still made through the target, but because the blade flexes as it's moving through its target, it makes it a little uneven.
Yeah, that is
which would then also cause more drag and potentially make it so that you don't make it through the target. It's very rigid compared to the longsword, which also allows you to pull and follow through a lot better.
Fair enough.
I'm gonna try to cut through this target with using as little strength as possible. I'm not even gonna move my feet.
That's interesting. All right, pretty good though. But again, that's where my like training is like, wait, you're not gonna move your feet like at all? Because I'm used to like, you take a little step or you like twist your, you still twist your hip around and like just to, Because again, it's a heavier sword, so you need a little bit more oomph to really get where you're going with it. So that makes sense that like with this, you don't even have to. Like that does track. Wow. Very good.
Ooh.
Oh, that sung. That was pretty.
Sharp still? Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a sharp ass sword. Ooh. Damn, I wish all my katanas were this sharp.
Do you?
All right, so we got another double mat here. There's no rod in the center, so. That was so easy.
That looked like butter. Wow. That's gorgeous.
Zero resistance going through that blade. Handle's pretty thin, but didn't really notice any significant vibrations. Yeah, easy. Oh my God, this thing's a beast.
Gorgeous. It's just, whoo!
All right, so obviously the katana is going to be way better at slashing and cutting, this sort of thing.
That is also
The
probably
curved
true.
edge, the longer handle. But let's test to see how well it thrusts.
It gets stuck. It seems to thrust all right.
Definitely gets stuck in there.
I mean, that person's torso's not happy anymore. Oh, you
It's
missed.
harder to be accurate with stabbing with a curved blade like this.
Yeah.
So thrusting with the longsword is clearly easier, faster. You can be more accurate with it. But yeah, I mean, the slashing power on this is can't be understated.
That's amazing.
Okay, so the blade is still extremely sharp. Really
Still
nice
touching it
job
and-
with this through-hardened blade. I'm impressed. I'm seriously impressed. This is not only the sharpest sword I've ever received, but it'll be a long time before this thing dulls.
Nice.
I doubt you'll ever need to sharpen this. You'd have to do so much cutting to have to sharpen this sword. If you're trying to find a tatami mat cutter, you will be hard-pressed to find a sword for better value. $350 is not a lot.
It's
to
not.
ask for.
It's not that bad.
It-
Like I can. There's a guy who I know who does. He makes them, and like I think the cheapest you can get him is like 500. And that's because he knows you, I think. But it's because, like I said, mine was really cheap. This one I got from Purple Heart Armory. It was $250, plus an extra 25 or so for the thread wrap instead of the leather wrap, because it's got a better grip on it. And again, I don't want to make it like, because he clearly does know what he's talking about, but it also seems, it's like, I feel like, depending with a long sword especially, because he keeps saying it's not for slashing, and it's like, like the cuts are incredibly important and incredibly effective in my experience. But again, I have a lot of more of experience with specifically Italian longsword, which is very different than like other types. So it's possible that he's just more familiar with these other types of longsword, which would give him a different idea about the thrust. And again, thrusts are very important. And when I fight, I tend to use a lot more thrusts because they're faster. And for me, because oftentimes I'm going against much taller people and much stronger people, I have to be quick. Like that is, as a shorter person, as a shorter weakling, speed is important. And that's what that's where my strength lies, is in how quick I can be. So that's where I go for the thrusts a lot. And a lot of the slashes can be easily turned into a thrust too. So you might go for a cut to the head, they block you, and then you just turn it into a thrust and get under their guard. And like, there's a million ways to do it. I just, I was like, oh wait, I feel like a cut is incredibly important when it comes to the longsword, and you're gonna do a lot of it. But again,
well-made sword. Both these swords actually exceeded my expectations. For entry-level blades, they're actually pretty competent cutters, even with their awkward balancing. The katana greatly outperformed the longsword in terms of
That is fair, though.
slashing, but came nowhere near the precision and range of the longsword's thrusts and defensive capabilities. So let me put it in a way you guys can understand. The katana is a pure DPS weapon through and through, while the longsword is a more balanced
girlfriend
weapon
resistance
meant for a tank. Now ask yourself, does one's role make one party member better than the other? The answer is no. They both have their place and their intended purpose, and some people just gravitate towards one more than the other. It's like comparing a 1911 to a Glock. Sure, there are clear advantages on the surface to the more modern Glock, but what it really comes down to is the person wielding it. Just because a Glock can hold more rounds in their magazine doesn't make the 1911 obsolete, and it definitely doesn't mean it'll beat it every single time. I personally gravitate more towards katanas because of my martial arts background, and growing up, I was a disgusting little weeb. Does that make the katana better than longsword? No. I'm not self-centered enough to think my preference as fact, and neither should you. At the end of the day, both of these swords are products of their age and culture, refined through centuries of warfare. So saying one is far superior to the other is like some kid on a playground saying their dad could beat up your dad, or that Xbox is better than PlayStation. It's completely foolish and generally rooted in childish bias. So which sword is better? The answer is neither. These swords are polar opposites. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. These swords are so different that in a real life setting, it would all come down to who is the better swordsman. But as you know, we don't fight with swords anymore, so it literally doesn't matter.
So it literally doesn't matter.
Keep an open mind, because not everything has to be a competition, especially things that are no longer relevant. Thanks for watching, guys.
Oh,
Be nice
he's
to each other
fun.
in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.
Okay. All right. Well, I had fun with that. I hope you did too. Look, I am a big sword geek in general, which I'm sure you've managed to figure out through this particular video. I don't know. Because again, I have more experience currently with a longsword. My experience with this was limited was limited to college. That was a while ago, and I only really took one class in the katana. I mean, I learned a bunch of moves. I learned some forms, but we didn't spar with this though. So we learned the forms. And I learned how to, do the form and then return it to its sheath without looking. So I learned some cool stuff, but I didn't learn how to spar with it. Unlike the longsword, which I do know how to spar with, and which I have been sparring with for a while now. And again, I just know a little bit more about it. And again, I think I would be interested because I think he was looking at more of a German style, which is different than what I know, which is just so fun. It's just really interesting that you can have a bunch of the same weapon and it's used so differently. So I have my swords. Which one do you like better? Let me know in the comments below. And let me know if you want to see any moves at some point. I'm sure that I can figure something out. So, I've got them. We're excited. I love my silly swords. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what to look at next in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video.